The Galactic Threat Assessment Network had been operational for approximately 12,000 standard cycles, and in that time, it had developed a beautifully complex system for categorizing exactly how quickly a planet could kill you. The bureaucrats who ran G10 were quite proud of their work. They had forms for everything: atmospheric toxicity, Form 7B, predator density analysis, Form 14J, geological instability metrics, an entire subsection requiring Form 22C through Form 22P, depending on whether your death would come from volcanoes, earthquakes, or sinkholes. It was all very thorough, very scientific, and as it turned out, completely missing the point. Earth had received its initial assessment 700 cycles ago, when a survey team had spent 3 months cataloging every single way the planet was actively trying to murder its inhabitants. The final report was 847 pages long. The executive summary alone was 32 pages, and it opened with the line, "We would like to formally request hazard pay for this assignment, retroactive to the moment we entered the system." The review board sent it back, claiming the language was too hyperbolic. The survey team resubmitted with documentation, video footage of storms that generated enough electrical discharge to power a small city, seismic readings showing tectonic plates that moved like they had somewhere important to be, biological samples from fauna that had evolved venom, claws, teeth, and bad attitudes in equal measure. A particularly detailed section on something called a hippopotamus that killed more humans annually than the planet's apex predators, despite being a herbivore that looked like a rotund riverstone with legs. The review board sent it back again, asking them to tone down the dramatics. The survey team's third submission included sworn affidavits from every crew member, medical records documenting stress-related illnesses, and a 40-minute video of the team leader standing in what humans called Australia, and just pointing at things while screaming. That one got approved, and Earth received its Class 9 Deathworld designation with a special subnotation that translated roughly to, "We are not legally liable if you ignore this warning." But here's where the galaxy's collective reasoning failed. Everyone assumed that the humans who left Earth were the ones who couldn't hack it. The weak ones. The ones who needed to escape to gentler environments where the weather didn't have a personal vendetta and the wildlife didn't treat existence as a combat sport. The logic seemed sound. After all, if you grew up in paradise, you'd stay there. Only those who found it too challenging would leave. Nobody stopped to consider what kind of baseline too challenging represented when your homeworld was actively hostile to life. Enter the Krythax. The Krythax came from Velshara, a moon orbiting a gas giant in the Kepler Traverse. Velshara was what happened when you took every pleasant adjective in the known languages and made them into a celestial body. Warm but not hot. Humid but not oppressive. Gravity at a comfortable 0.7 standard. Abundant resources. Beautiful vistas. Zero natural disasters because even the geology was too polite to cause problems. The Krythax themselves were apex predators who'd achieved that status so completely that they'd exterminated every other large predator on their moon approximately 6,000 years ago and had been bored ever since. They were impressive specimens. 7 limbs arranged radially around a central torso, each tipped with retractable claws. Sensory organs that could detect heat signatures, pheromones, and electrical impulses. A neurology built for ambush tactics and lightning-fast strikes. Their reflexes operated at a speed that most species couldn't track with unassisted vision. They were, objectively speaking, terrifying hunters. They were also spoiled children playing with loaded weapons they didn't respect. When you're an apex predator from a paradise world, you never learn the most important lesson that evolution teaches on harsher planets. Sometimes you're the prey, And when that happens, the only thing that matters is whether you can make it too expensive for the predator to kill you. The Krythax had never been prey. Not once in their evolutionary history. They'd never felt the cold terror of being hunted by something better adapted than themselves. They'd never had to develop the kind of paranoid hypervigilance that comes from living somewhere that treats your survival as a statistical anomaly. So when they took to the stars looking for worthy trophies to hunt, they did so with the confidence of beings who'd never encountered actual consequences. The hunting pack currently stalking the corridors of Meridian Station University consisted of 6 Krythax, led by Vexthor, a hunter whose trophy room allegedly contained specimens from 43 different worlds. His second was Krythax, who specialized in tracking and surveillance. The other 4 were younger, building their reputations, eager for kills that would establish their status. They'd been observing the university's human population for 2 weeks, studying movement patterns, identifying vulnerable individuals. Universities were excellent hunting grounds, they'd learned. Security was always a nightmare of conflicting species requirements and jurisdictional confusion. Students kept irregular schedules. The stations were large enough that disappearances could be explained away as transfers or dropouts. The female in Section 9, Vexthor indicated, his primary limb gesturing toward a holographic display showing surveillance footage. Biochemistry student. Attends night lab sessions 3 times per week. Always leaves via the maintenance corridor at 2300 hours. Minimal traffic in that route, no security cameras in the dead zones. Krythax enhanced the image, running biological analysis. Standard human. Physiology. Mass approximately 58 kilograms. Height 165 centimeters. Muscle density reading suggests minimal physical training. No visible cybernetic enhancements. No registered weapons permits. She carries a bag with academic supplies and nothing else. Alone every time? One of the younger hunters asked. Consistently. The human students often work in isolation during research projects. This one appears to have no social connections within her program. Vexthor's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Perfect candidate. A Class 9 world specimen, another said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice synthesizer. The status gained from that classification alone will be ours for minimal risk, Vexthor finished. The Classification Bureau rates worlds based on environmental factors. Gravity, atmosphere, indigenous dangers. This human clearly fled those dangers, sought easier living conditions in space. Look at her behavioral patterns. She walks with no awareness of her surroundings, completely absorbed in her data devices. No threat assessment, no defensive positioning. On Velshara, prey that inattentive would be dead in a day. Krythax pulled up Earth's classification file, scrolling through the environmental hazard reports. The planet itself is genuinely dangerous, but the humans who leave it are self-selected weaklings. Those who stay are the strong ones. Those who flee to stations like this are academic types, soft intellectuals with no survival capabilities. When do we take her? One of the younger hunters asked. Tonight. We'll follow standard protocol. Announcement of intent, sporting chance to flee, proper pursuit. Everything by traditional hunting law, fully sanctioned. The station authorities can't touch us if we follow the forms. Vexthor's sensory organs gleamed with anticipation. We'll have our trophy by midnight, processed and preserved by 300 hours. Easy hunt, maximum prestige. What they didn't know, because the G10 forms had no checkbox for it, was that the human they'd selected was currently running on 4 hours of sleep, synthetic caffeine, and the kind of spite that only academic pressure can generate. Her name was Mira Castellanos, and she was having the worst week of her academic career. Monday. Her primary experiment had contaminated itself somehow. 3 months of work gone, and her advisor had suggested she'd been careless with sterile protocol, in a tone that suggested he thought she'd been actively trying to ruin her own research. Tuesday. The group project presentation, where her teammates had contributed exactly nothing, and she'd done 80% of the work while they took equal credit. Wednesday. The cafeteria had run out of Volt Boost energy drinks, which meant she'd been reduced to drinking the station's standard issue coffee that tasted like someone had filtered it through a recycling filter and called it beverage. Thursday, today, had started with her discovery that someone had used her lab station without cleaning it, leaving her equipment contaminated and her samples compromised. She'd spent 6 hours decontaminating everything, which meant she was running late for her biochem synthesis work, which meant she'd be here until midnight, which meant she'd have maybe 5 hours of sleep before her Roro 700 presentation tomorrow. She was not in a good mood. Mira was, by Earth standards, completely unremarkable. Average height, average build, average grades that were decent but not exceptional. She jogged occasionally, but wasn't particularly athletic. She'd taken one self-defense course in undergrad and remembered maybe half of it. Her main distinguishing feature was a stubborn refusal to quit when things got difficult. But that wasn't unique among humans, just a baseline survival trait. What she didn't know, because on Earth everyone had these capabilities, so they seemed normal, was that her skeletal structure was approximately twice as dense as the Krythax expected from a creature her size. Her cardiovascular system could maintain physical exertion for hours through mechanisms that would require performance-enhancing drugs in most species. Her adrenal response could temporarily override pain signals, increase muscle efficiency, and sharpen cognitive processing to levels that other species achieved only through combat stimulants. Her brain could shift from abstract theoretical problem-solving to immediate threat response faster than most species could recognize a threat existed. But these were just normal human things. Everyone could do them. Right now, she was exhausted, frustrated, and trying to remember if she'd saved her synthesis calculations before the lab computer had crashed for the 3rd time this week. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. She had a headache from the terrible coffee. And she still had to write up tonight's results before the deadline tomorrow. She packed her equipment at 23:15 hours, 15 minutes later than planned. The regular corridors would be crowded with the post-evening class rush, loud and full of people who'd want to chat. And her social battery was completely dead. She opted for the maintenance corridor route. Quieter, faster, and she could walk without anyone trying to make small talk about the weather or upcoming exams or whatever else people felt compelled to discuss when her brain was running on fumes. The maintenance level was dimly lit, all industrial functionality with exposed piping and utility conduits. The lighting ran on motion sensors to save power, sections illuminating as she walked and darkening behind her. Her footsteps echoed on the metal grating. She was halfway through when they stepped out of the shadows. 6 figures, large and radially symmetric, moving with the fluid confidence of apex predators. They spread out across the corridor, blocking her path forward and her escape route back. Mira stopped walking. Her conscious brain was still catching up, processing what she was seeing. Krythax, her academic knowledge supplied. 7-limbed ambush predators from Velshara. Non-aggressive unless threatened, typically kept to their own stations. Her hindbrain, that ancient and paranoid survival system coded into her DNA by millions of years of being both predator and prey, was way ahead of her conscious thoughts and already screaming alerts. Trapped, outnumbered, positioned deliberately. This is intentional. This is predation behavior. Threat, threat, threat. Thor stepped forward, his primary limb extended in what his species considered a gesture of sporting fairness. When he spoke, his translator rendered his speech in flat, formal tones. Human student, you have been selected as quarry for a traditional Krythax hunt. By galactic treaty and sporting convention, we are required to inform you of this selection and provide you with opportunity to attempt escape. You have 60 seconds before pursuit begins. We suggest you use them. Mira stared at him. Her brain was doing several things simultaneously. One part was confirming identification. Definitely Krythax. 6 individuals. Positioned to cut off escape routes. Another part was running threat assessment. Superior numbers, superior reach. Natural weapons versus her complete lack of any weapons. A third part, the part that was running on 4 hours of sleep and rage at her terrible week, was much simpler. Absolutely not. We're not doing this, no. I'm sorry, she said slowly, her voice very calm in the way that precedes either complete breakdown or sudden violence. Did you just say you're hunting me? Correct. You should consider it an honor. Krythax traditional hunts are reserved for worthy prey. As a specimen from a Class 9 Deathworld, you qualify for this distinction. Thor's translator gave his words a formal tone that made the whole situation even more surreal. 45 seconds remain. We strongly suggest you begin running. Something cold and clear settled in Mira's chest. Not panic. Panic was what happened before decisions got made. This was after. This was her body's threat response system doing its job. Flooding her bloodstream with adrenaline, sharpening her vision, turning down pain anticipation, ramping up aggression. This was her hindbrain looking at the situation and making a very simple calculation. Flight isn't an option, so fight. No, Mira said. The Krythax paused. Krythax tilted his sensory cluster in what might have been confusion. Clarify. Are you refusing to flee? I'm refusing to participate in whatever this is. I have a presentation at 700 tomorrow. I have results to write up tonight. I've had maybe 4 hours of sleep and the worst week of my academic career. And I don't have time for this. Her voice was still calm. Too calm. The adrenaline was working now, sharpening everything, making the corridor seem brighter and more detailed. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to move, and I'm going to leave. One of the younger Krythax made a chittering sound that the translator rendered as laughter. The prey doesn't understand the situation. It believes it can simply refuse. 30 seconds, Thor said. Human, you are misunderstanding your circumstances. This is a sanctioned hunt under traditional law. Your options are to flee and provide sport, or remain and die quickly. Those are your only choices. Mira's eyes tracked the environment while he spoke. Maintenance corridor, approximately 4 meters wide. Exposed piping running along both walls. Water, atmosphere processing, electrical conduits. Utility panels at regular intervals. Fire suppression system with manual extinguisher mounted every 10 meters. Grating floor with access panels to sub-level systems. Emergency lighting strips at floor level. Her bag contained her data pad, 2 textbooks, a water bottle, 3 pens, her calculator, and her spare lab coat. Not much. But humans were tool users. Humans were frighteningly good at weaponizing their environment. 10 seconds, human. Final warning. Mira set her bag down carefully. When she straightened, her hands were loose at her sides, her weight balanced. Okay. Let me be extremely clear about something. I didn't start this. I don't want this. But if you come at me, I will defend myself, and you will not like how that goes. Vexthor's mandibles spread in what his species used as a smile. Admirable spirit. It will make the hunt more memorable. Time expires. Begin. He lunged. Mira moved. The thing about humans is that they're not the fastest species, not the strongest, not the most acute senses. What they are is versatile, adaptive, and absolutely vicious when threatened. And they can go from tired graduate student to active threat in the time it takes most species to register that something's wrong. Mira ducked under Vexthor's reaching limbs, felt the air displacement as his claws passed through where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier, came up fast and drove her fist into his central torso with all her mass behind it. It didn't hurt him much, his carapace was too tough, but it surprised him. Prey didn't advance. Prey fled. She didn't give him time to process. She was already moving, grabbing her water bottle from her bag and hurling it at the nearest Krythax's sensory cluster. It connected with a satisfying crack, and the hunter recoiled reflexively. Then Krythax caught her with two of his limbs, wrapping around her torso and lifting her off the ground. Big mistake. He pulled her toward him, probably planning to immobilize her while the others closed in for the kill. But Mira didn't resist the pull. She went with it, used the momentum, and drove her elbow into the joint where his sensory cluster connected to his torso. Something crunched. Krythax's grip loosened fractionally. It was enough. Mira twisted, got her feet against his central mass, and pushed off hard. She broke free, landed in a roll on the grating, came up moving toward the wall, where the fire extinguisher was mounted. 3 Krythax converged on her simultaneously. She got her hands on the extinguisher, yanked it free from its mounting, spun, and discharged it directly into their sensory organs at point-blank range. The chemical foam was designed to suppress electrical fires, which meant it was both freezing cold and mildly caustic. To sensory organs designed for thermal and chemical detection, it was essentially a flashbang grenade and pepper spray combined. The 3 Krythax reeled back, their coordination destroyed, clicking and chittering in confusion and pain. Mira didn't stop. She swung the empty extinguisher like a bat, connected with the nearest Krythax's limb, felt something crack, dropped the extinguisher and ran, not away, but toward the nearest utility panel. One of the younger hunters, not blinded by the foam, cut her off. All 7 limbs spread wide to grab her. Mira dropped into a slide. Military crawled between his limbs, came up behind him, and kept going. Behind her, she heard confused clicking, the sound of predators who'd expected fleeing prey and gotten something entirely different. She reached the utility panel and ripped it open. Inside, electrical conduits, atmosphere processing controls, and emergency system overrides. Now she had options. Vexthor was rallying his hunters, his voice sharp with commands in their native language. The 3 affected by the foam were recovering. They were regrouping. "Enough sport," Vexthor snarled. "Take her down, all of us simultaneously. End this." They came at her as a coordinated unit, the way apex predators do when prey proves more difficult than expected. Mira grabbed an electrical conduit with both hands and yanked. The maintenance corridor lighting died. Emergency lighting kicked in, dim red strips at floor level that provided maybe 10% of the previous illumination. The Krythax had excellent low-light vision. But Mira had something better. She knew the environment, and they didn't. She moved in the darkness, using the piping as cover, feeling her way by memory. Behind her, she heard the Krythax spreading out, searching. Her hands found what she was looking for. A section of broken piping she'd noticed earlier, about 1 meter long, jagged metal on one end, where it had been cut for repairs. Now she had a weapon. She waited, controlling her breathing, listening to them move. Patience. Humans were persistence hunters. Humans were terrifyingly good at waiting for the right moment. One of the younger Krythax passed within striking distance. Mira lunged from the shadows and drove the jagged pipe into his central torso with every bit of strength she had. It punched through his carapace, sank deep, and when she yanked it back out, dark fluid came with it. The Krythax collapsed, clicking weakly. The others converged on her position, but she was already moving again, using the piping to swing herself up and over their grasping limbs. She landed on the other side of the corridor, breathing hard, the pipe slick with fluid in her hands. 5 left, 5 against 1. And she was tiring, the adrenaline starting to burn through her reserves. But humans had one more advantage that most species didn't. When cornered, when exhausted, when facing certain death, humans got mean. They stopped trying to survive and started trying to take the threat down with them. Mutual destruction was better than just dying. "She killed Trixall," one of the hunters said, his translator rendering shock in his tone. "Impossible. She's prey. She's..." Krythax didn't finish. Mira was done running. She advanced on them, the pipe held like a spear, her face absolutely expressionless in the red emergency lighting. She looked like something from their nightmares. Covered in dark fluid that wasn't hers, eyes reflecting the red light, coming forward with the inevitability of a predator that's decided you're dead. 2 of the younger Krythax broke. They ran. Vexthor roared something that stopped them, words in his own language that his authority forced them to obey. But his confidence was gone now. This wasn't a hunt anymore. This was a fight, and fights could go either way. "Surround her," he commanded. "She's one wounded animal. We are Krythax. We are apex hunters. We do not flee from prey." They spread out, moving with renewed purpose but also wariness. They'd learned she was dangerous. Not dangerous enough, their body language said, but dangerous enough to respect. Mira's analytical mind, still functioning despite the adrenaline and exhaustion, made a cold calculation. She was outnumbered. She was tiring. They'd adapted to her tactics. She needed a force multiplier. Her eyes tracked upward, atmosphere processing pipe running along the ceiling. Specifically, the coolant line for the environmental systems, full of liquid nitrogen for temperature regulation. Could she reach it? Not from the ground. The piping she'd been using for cover ran vertically up the wall, part of the station's water reclamation system. Could she climb it? Her hands were slippery with alien blood. She was exhausted. Her shoulders were screaming from the earlier fight. Didn't matter. It was the only option. Mira ran for the wall. Behind her, Vexthor shouted commands. The Krythax pursued. She jumped, caught the lowest pipe, hauled herself up. Her hands slipped. She caught herself, kept climbing. Pain flared in her shoulders, her forearms burning with effort. Below, the Krythax reached the wall and started climbing after her. They were faster, more limbs, better climbers. She wasn't going to make it. Mira reached as high as she could, swung the pipe with the last of her strength at the coolant line. Once. Twice. Third time, the metal ruptured. Liquid nitrogen exploded from the breach, a stream of fluid so cold it was boiling as it hit the warmer corridor air. It poured directly onto the Krythax climbing below her. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The liquid nitrogen flash froze everything it touched. The Krythax's limbs became brittle, their carapaces cracking from thermal shock. They fell, hitting the grating hard, shattering on impact. Vexthor, on the ground, stared up at his frozen, shattered hunters. Then at Mira, still clinging to the piping, breathing hard, covered in blood and frost. Deathworld. he whispered. Then he ran. Mira hung there until she was sure he was gone. Then she hung there for another 5 minutes because her arms were shaking too badly to climb down safely. When she finally made it to the ground, she had to step over the remains of 3 Krythax, frozen and broken. The one she'd stabbed earlier was dead from blood loss. The 2 who'd run with Vex Thor were gone. 5 bodies. Well, 4.5, given the state of the frozen ones. 5 bodies in a university maintenance corridor meant investigations, authorities, questions, lawyers, media attention, deportation hearings, the end of her academic career. Or she could fix this. Her brain was still in threat response mode, but shifting now from combat to problem solving. Both were survival mechanisms. Both were human specialties. Mira looked at the ruptured coolant line, still pouring liquid nitrogen, looked at the emergency systems panel she'd opened earlier, looked at the atmosphere processing controls. She was a biochemistry student. She understood decomposition, chemical reactions, temperature dynamics, forensic evidence markers. She also understood waste management systems because she'd worked a summer job in station maintenance to pay for tuition. She could fix this. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of dragging bodies to the waste processing access panels. 3 hours of overriding safety protocols using maintenance codes she technically wasn't supposed to have. 3 hours of using the liquid nitrogen to freeze the remains brittle enough to break into pieces, small enough to fit through the waste processing chutes. 3 hours of methodically destroying evidence while her hands shook and her face was wet with tears she didn't remember starting. The waste processing system fed into the station's matter reclamation unit, which broke down organic material at the molecular level for raw material recycling. By morning, there would be nothing left but undifferentiated carbon, nitrogen, and trace elements mixed into the station's general recycling output. She wiped the logs, adjusted the timestamps, created a false narrative of coolant line failure and emergency system malfunction that required maintenance response. By the time she was done, it was 400 hours. She'd missed every deadline. Her presentation was in 3 hours. She hadn't slept. She stumbled back to her quarters, showered until the water ran cold, and sat on her bed, staring at nothing. Her datapad pinged with a message from her advisor. Hope your experiments went well. Looking forward to your presentation. She almost laughed. Almost. Maintenance discovered the coolant line failure at 600 hours, filed a report about system malfunction and improper pressure regulation, scheduled repairs for the following week. No bodies, no blood, no evidence of anything except equipment failure. Mira attended her presentation at 700. She'd pulled together slides from her memory, presented without notes, and answered questions on autopilot. Her advisor said she seemed distracted, but her work was solid. She scored an A-. She wanted to scream about the injustice of losing points when she'd literally fought off 6 alien hunters the night before. But instead, she smiled and said she'd do better next time. Her hands didn't shake when she took notes. Her voice didn't crack when she discussed methodology. She was fine, completely fine. The Krythax ship, waiting in orbit, received no communication from its hunting party. After 5 days, it returned to Velshara to report. 6 hunters missing, no distress signal, no bodies, no trace. An investigation was launched. It concluded, unknown fate, possibly equipment failure, possibly piracy, possibly any of 100 dangers that existed in space. The file was closed after 2 months. On Velshara, families mourned. 6 hunters lost to the void. Their names were added to memorial walls. Their stories told to younglings as cautionary tales about the dangers of hunting in unfamiliar territory. They never knew the truth. In an office on the G-10 headquarters station, An analyst named Kix sat reviewing casualty data and frowned at a pattern she was seeing. 15 incidents this cycle of hunting parties going missing near Earth-affiliated stations. All different species, all apex predators from their homeworlds, all vanished without trace. She drafted a report. Recommend revision to Class 9 Deathworld classification protocols. Current system rates environmental hazards but fails to account for adaptive traits in surviving populations. Species that thrive in Class 9 environments may present significant danger regardless of individual threat assessment. The report sat in committee review for 9 months before being rejected due to insufficient empirical evidence and unclear classification criteria. The forms remained unchanged. The galaxy continued its business, unaware that its filing systems were dangerously incomplete. Universities taught xenobiology from textbooks that classified species by homeworld environment, never considering what those environments created. Hunters planned expeditions targeting creatures from dangerous worlds, assuming anyone who left such worlds was weak, soft, easy prey. And occasionally, very occasionally, hunting parties would simply disappear. No bodies, no evidence, no trace. Statistical anomalies, the reports called them. Space was dangerous. Sometimes people didn't come home. Mira graduated 18 months later with her doctorate in biochemistry. Her dissertation on enzymatic catalysis and decomposition rates in various atmospheric conditions was well received. She took a position at a research facility studying waste reclamation efficiency. Her specialty was making things disappear completely. She never told anyone about the Krythax, never mentioned it in therapy, though she went regularly for academic stress. The nightmares faded over time, from nightly to weekly to occasional. She dated, made friends, published papers, lived a quiet life. Sometimes someone would mention Earth's Deathworld rating, and she'd smile politely and change the subject. On Velshara, they still taught their younglings about the glory of the hunt, the pride of taking worthy prey. They still sent hunting parties to the stars, seeking trophies and status. Some of them never came home. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody updated the classifications. Nobody looked at the pattern of disappearances and thought, maybe the prey isn't prey anymore. The universe spun on, vast and indifferent. Stars died and were born. Species rose and fell. Bureaucrats filed their forms and patted themselves on their backs for their thoroughness. And somewhere on a research station, a human scientist sipped terrible coffee, cursed her experiment results, and tried not to think about liquid nitrogen and the sound of things shattering. Mostly, she succeeded. After all, she had deadlines to meet. The galaxy really needed better filing systems. But that would require admitting the forms were incomplete, and bureaucracy doesn't admit mistakes. It just files them under statistical anomaly and moves on.